But there's been a bit of a miscalculation there. You see, Wicknell might have all the sway in Zimbabwe, but in South Africa and now in the United States, he does not. It's a different ballgame, and now they want him, like they really want him. We'll get back to this later though. For now, let's go back to the grey list issue, because it's such an important issue and you need to know about it. So there's something that's called the Financial Action Task Force, FATF grey list. It's for countries that are under money laundering and terrorism financing risk. Zimbabwe was on it for a while, and as a result, between 2019 and 2022, Zimbabwe lost well over 100 international banking relationships. Basically, banks in other countries that that correspond with Zimbabwean banks, they just ended the relationship. The country was left with just 2 international banking relationships, according to the RBZ speaking in around 2021-2022. They described this FATF grey list as a curse, saying the listing of Zimbabwe on the grey list of non-compliance jurisdiction turned out to be a curse for the country, because it saw many of our banks losing several correspondent bank relationships, as well as facing serious challenges in trying to establish new ones. So basically, banks like FBC, for instance, if they needed to move money to New York and they needed a corresponding bank, they couldn't get that, making it a very tedious and expensive process. The increased difficulty in transacting that pushed the cost to the ordinary folk and made banking for individuals and business in Zimbabwe outright difficult. I was receiving Google AdSense money at the time from a website I was running, and we had problems getting that money to come through to FBC. The RBZ tried to improve that, and after a raft of changes, they got Zimbabwe removed from that grey list. But you see, the latest developments, they could see Zimbabwe firmly headed back to that list, undoing much of the very good work that these men and women had done pretty much over the last 5-6 years. You see, Zimbabwe was put on that list because, in simple terms, it was non-compliant with a framework to combat money laundering and terrorist funding. Wicknell's deal, you could say this is state-sponsored money laundering. Some of the money that left to his account, for instance, it went to a business that had its FNB account in South Africa flagged for money laundering. Now, that particular business, which is subject of a follow-on investigation, it's a business that is based in Zimbabwe that basically allows people to send up to 1 million rand out of Zimbabwe and into South Africa, no questions asked. So you could rock up to that place and you could send $1 million, no questions asked, going outside the banking processes. And obviously, that means that is subject to exploitation. Now, this company is subject to an entire investigation, like I said, but so far we have found that at the time of release, they even switched accounts and switched names because South African authorities had not only flagged them, but they were coming after them. The ZEC deal itself, it was flagged by South African authorities, who first couldn't believe that payments from a finance ministry of a whole government and a country were possibly corrupt, inexplicable, and criminal. And this is the reason Zimbabwe was on the grey list to begin with. The country could not be trusted to comply with anti-money laundering laws or to go out of its way to ensure that financial crimes were looked at and looked after. The country was actively helping people launder money. And some of that money, it landed in the wrong hands, and some of it is now suspected to have been used to fund crime and to fund terrorism. Some of the documents that we have seen and dug up, they show that South Africa raised the issue of Wicknell's payments with their other partners, including the United States Department of Justice, because some of the money that was milked by Wicknell from ZEC, it found its way to the United States and some of it to the Southeast, where he has family members. And South Africa, true to its duty of care, notified these countries, including the Americans, that, by the way, this money has come from corrupt activities. And these are the things that Zimbabwean authorities should be doing to combat international crime. Instead, the finance ministry was actively doing the crime itself. You see, governments are assumed to be authentic, to be transparent and straightforward. It is why weird payments to Wicknell for technical products were initially not flagged by the banks despite being extremely suspicious. Banks and authorities, they always imagine that if a government is buying a service, then that service must be real. They did not count on the fact that we had a rogue ministry and a rogue permanent secretary of the ministry who was authorizing payments outside of due process in what was outright a criminal deal. And now when that trust is lost, it creates a serious problem, a really serious one, like the grey list problems we are talking about. And talking about problems in general, Wicknell is just a problem on his own, isn't it? If you rewind back to when Mugabe was about to be removed, the petitions and complaints then against Robert Mugabe, they had Wicknell front and center. He was one of the key reasons why Lacoste supporters at the time were extremely angry by what they called blatant corruption. Fast forward to today, Wicknell is a big name on Blessed Geza's list of problems too. It likely boils down to his arrogance. Wicknell is an abrasive character who is inherently corrupt. He's in everyone's face, you could say, and he makes enemies for the president at a high rate of speed. He's also just reckless in how he does his things. Don't think about him getting money from ZEC and spending it. Think of another different issue, for instance. You remember the Zifa presidency? The current president had a very, very good run. He ran a good campaign. He was expected to win. He had done his work. In fact, prior to the election, people were even worried that perhaps his tribe could block him, or his tribal affiliation could be the reason that he doesn't win. But on the eve of the election, Wicknell then posted that he will give gifts to people that vote for the current president. The effect of that is that it was then seen as vote buying. So the president, who had largely been accepted as the best man for the job at Zifa, he went in a minute from being the best man of a job to a man running a tainted campaign. He survived the scare, but Wicknell, for no tangible reason, had caused more problems for him than needed. And that is what he has done quite persistently and consistently for a very long time, if you look back to his time even under Robert Mugabe. His foot is always in his mouth, which doesn't help. And now, first this was ED, but it looks like Zimbabwe might then pay for it with a grey list issue because he was brazen in the money laundering and in the misuse of funds, and authorities world over aren't blaming Wicknell, they're blaming Zimbabwe. But one other thing that, that makes this case a mess for Zimbabwe is that when this issue was reported last year, ZEC, they denied it. They released a letter saying it was all fake news, Renform didn't have a contract with Wicknell, blah, 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 blah. It was all just a bunch of lies. We now know that most of the money that was paid on behalf of ZEC by the finance ministry, 800 million out of 1.3 billion, made its way to Wicknell's pockets. And those things are what make it worse, as I say. Governments and entities are expected to have some integrity. It is why when they say something, it is imagined to be true. For instance, when it comes to defamation, if something's coming from the government, from the police, or from council, it's thought to be true. It's called something called absolute privilege, and it's a whole different discussion nonetheless. But it's a problem when you have entities and bodies that are linked to the state that then engage in corrupt and criminal acts, and then they lie about it, because it means that the whole state, Zimbabwe in this case, is seen as dishonest. And that is sad, because truly hard-working men and women, they fought to get Zimbabwe off that grey list. It was a good thing because it helped the country function better, and it lowered the cost of things in general, especially the cost of doing banking. That work is now on the cusp of being undone. Yikes. Anyway, now we have to go back to that correspondence that we mentioned earlier. Yes, Wicknell is rude, Wicknell is arrogant, Wicknell is abrasive, and Wicknell is untouchable in Zimbabwe. However, outside of Zimbabwe, he is not. And this is where the problems start to sort of land on his doorstep, where some of the money that Wicknell received made its way to the United States. South Africa alerted financial watchdogs there about some of this money. Basically, South Africans were like, hey, some of these money sent to your country, via this Wicknell and these companies, we think they're proceeds of crime. So At the time of release of this video, the FBI and the United States Department of Justice, they were made aware by South African authorities. What does this mean? Well, it means something and it means nothing at the moment. In the past, the USA has arrested and extradited people that sent stolen funds to the USA or that were involved in global financial crime. In some cases, like that of a former Mozambican finance minister arrested in South Africa, the USA had an active interest in that case. But we do know and do understand that South Africa will not risk its relationship with the Americans for the sake of Wicknell, and the Americans themselves, if they deem that some of those funds were then used to fund terrorism, there's going to be an issue. It's too early to tell, but from what we know, both the FBI and the United States Department of Justice, they now have thick files on Wicknell, and while he can use his proximity and power in Zimbabwe, it won't work in South Africa, and it also won't work in the USA. Essentially, we now have a situation where Wicknell may find himself in the same boat as Shepherd Bushiri. You see, Bushiri, even if he gets Malawi to block his extradition to South Africa, he's going to remain stuck there, because if Bushiri ever went to Kenya, South Africa would attempt to get him from there, or if he went to Dubai, they'll try and get him from there instead, in places where he doesn't enjoy a relationship with the president. We know in Malawi that Bushiri is protected by Chakwera, they've got a very good relationship, but that wouldn't necessarily translate to another country. So Wicknell will find himself in pretty much the same situation as the Americans are now onto him. But all of that will be in part 4, episode 4 of investigating Wicknell's